Hello, I'm Maria Titizian.
And I'm Rubina Margosian, and this is the Week in Review.
Every week, we bring you the stories shaping Armenia and the region.
From politics and policy to social issues and conflict, we break down the news and what it means for you.
This week in the news, over 1,000 tons of Russian wheat arrives in Armenia through Azerbaijani territory. The EU hands over its Visa Liberalization Action Plan to Armenia, officially setting the process in motion. And former President Serzh Sargsyan faces new corruption charges. These stories and more in our weekly roundup of the news.
This week, Azerbaijani and Turkish experts and journalists were in Yerevan again, this time attending a government-affiliated Orbeli Center forum titled Building Peace and Multilateral Cooperation. The visit came shortly after fresh expansionist remarks by Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, who accused Armenia and the Armenian diaspora of distorting Azerbaijan's history and called for greater efforts to promote what he described as the true version of it. Aliyev claimed that Azerbaijanis once lived in Armenia but were driven out, expressing confidence that they would live there again. He argued that Azerbaijanis have never been afflicted with the disease of separatism and that their return to what he called historical lands should not intimidate Armenia, saying they would return not in tanks but in automobiles. Aliyev also pointed to early 20th century Tsarist Russian maps, claiming that most place names in modern-day Armenia are of Azerbaijani origin and that Lake Sevan did not appear on those maps, only Lake Kyonja. He alleged that Tsarist Russia had relocated Armenians from Iran and eastern Anatolia to Karabakh to alter the region's ethnic and religious makeup, urging more research and public materials to make the idea of Azerbaijanis' return to Armenia seem logical and fair. In Yerevan, Azerbaijani experts were questioned about these remarks. One of them, Rusif Husseinov, said that while only Azerbaijani officials could formally respond, the August 8 agreement clearly defines mutual recognition of territorial integrity and the inviolability of borders. He added that Azerbaijani society overall views renewed contacts with Armenia positively, though not everyone supports reconciliation, as many wounds remain fresh.
Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and Foreign Minister Arat Mirzoyan also addressed Aliyev's comments. Pashinyan said the side should avoid dwelling on history, while Mirzoyan noted that if one were to look far enough back, Armenian place names could be found well beyond modern Armenia's borders. The Azerbaijani experts also discussed the so-called Zangezur corridor and the TRIP, this is the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity Transit Initiative. Zaur Shiriev explained, this is another Azerbaijani who is in Armenia, explained that for Azerbaijan, the Zangezur corridor is a broader concept unrelated to TRIP, and that unlike in Armenia, the word corridor does not carry negative connotations. Commenting on the unimpeded communication referenced in the Washington Declaration, which envisions transit between Azerbaijan and Nakhichevan through Armenia, the experts said the main negotiations are currently between Armenia and the U.S. Azerbaijan's position, they noted, is to ensure rapid and unimpeded passage, primarily to benefit the population of Nakhichevan, which has also suffered, they said, from the decades-long conflict. They added that the U.S. should help Armenia define what unimpeded transit means in practice, which could eventually involve electronic systems or other mechanisms minimizing physical inspections. Husseinov concluded that despite challenges, the Washington meeting had injected a sense of optimism and created an increasingly dynamic atmosphere between the two countries.
At the forum, Pashinyan underscored that Yerevan and Baku have mutually recognized each other's territorial integrity, both in last year's protocol signed by the border commissions and in the initial peace agreement. He said the conflict is politically over, but persists at a socio-psychological level. A gap, he argued, must be bridged through political leadership. Pashinyan characterized the current moment as an organic peace shaped within the region, not imposed from outside, and stressed that it requires daily care, an agenda, he said, the government and the ruling majority remain committed to. Addressing the debates on returns, Pashinyan reiterated that calls for the return of Armenians to Artsakh and more broadly return agendas for displaced populations risk dragging both sides back to the conflict's starting parameters. He pointed out a contradiction. On the one hand, there are claims that even a short interaction, 20 or 30 seconds with a border guard or a customs officer would be psychologically difficult for citizens. He means the Azerbaijani citizens, because Aliyev keeps saying, and also the officials visiting Yerevan keep saying, that interaction should be avoided with Armenians because it's traumatizing apparently for the Azerbaijanis. On the other hand, Pashinyan said there are demands for the mass return of people displaced decades ago. Pashinyan argued that if basic face-to-face contact is considered a problem, presenting large-scale returns as realistic is not serious and in fact risks reopening the conflict.
The Prime Minister also addressed the future of the EU monitoring mission, saying no major changes are expected until a final peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan is signed. Once the agreement is concluded and ratified, the mission's format may be adjusted. He added that discussions with EU partners on this matter have already begun and will continue in a more practical framework when the time comes.
While Baku presents its Western Azerbaijan agenda as a humanitarian and historical, adding that On My Part initiative launched by the so-called Western Azerbaijan community, OC Media, this is a Georgia-based media organization, reported this week that leaked documents show otherwise. The investigation revealed that Azerbaijan's presidential administration has been coordinating and financing the international rollout of the Western Azerbaijan narrative, effectively laying the grounds for potential territorial claims against Armenia. OC Media is not the only one that's been talking about this forever. We're one of the media that have several articles detailing how this narrative is being shaped, how it's being propelled, how it's being taking shape and roots. So one of these articles is by Armin Edikranyan. It's called Hijacking History, Baku's Western Azerbaijan Campaign. We have another one by Datevi Kairabetyan, Fairy Tales, Textbooks and Territorial Claims, Weaving the Myth of Western Azerbaijan. This actually looks into what the textbooks are saying, that new revised textbooks are saying in Azerbaijan, and even children's fairy tales about the narrative. We have a piece by Erasmus Chambak, who is the author of the OC Media report. It's called Searching for Western Azerbaijan. And last but not least, and not actually the last one, these are only a selection of the articles we have, is by David Khachataryan. It's called Western Azerbaijan, Pan-Turkism and International Law. Check them out if you have time. They're on our website.
And in Baku, prosecutors have announced that the so-called guilt of Nagorno-Karabakh's former political and military leaders has been, quote, proven. The ongoing trial, widely viewed as a political show trial, targets 15 members of Artsak's leadership, whom Azerbaijani authorities accuse of crimes allegedly committed from 1988 to September 2023, including waging war, committing genocide, and seizing power by force. Azerbaijan's first deputy prosecutor general claimed the charges are supported by evidence and further asserted that the defendants indirectly participated in crimes purportedly committed by the Armenian state during the same period. Prosecutors have also said the group currently on trial represents only part of those they hold responsible. It remains unclear what sentences they are seeking.
And a train carrying over 1,000 tons of Russian weed, 15 wagons in total, has arrived in Armenia via Azerbaijan and Georgia. The Armenian government hailed the delivery as an important step towards reopening regional transport links and strengthening economic cooperation. Yerevan said the move is one of the practical roots of Washington agreements, contributing to the institutionalization of peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan and helping build mutual trust. Moscow's transport ministry announced that by the end of January of 2026, Russia will send an additional 132 wagons of wheat to Armenia along the same route and is exploring possibilities for transporting other types of cargo. This marks the first time since the Soviet era that goods have been shipped to Armenia through Azerbaijani territory. Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Overchuk called the new railway connection a real contribution to peace in the South Caucasus, adding that it strengthens Russia's regional transport links and broadens Armenia's access to Eurasian markets. He also noted that the opening of the new railway line stems from agreements reached by the leaders of Russia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan in 2020 and 21. These are the November 9, January 11, November 26, and October 31. Doesn't matter the dates, but all the trilateral agreements. It was generalized, as well as the efforts of the trilateral working group on reopening regional communications, co-chaired by the three countries' deputy prime ministers. And a side note, that working group has not convened since July of 2023. 2 weeks earlier, this is just a little bit of recent context, Aliyev had announced that all transit restrictions for cargo bound for Armenia have been lifted. The first such shipment, Kazakh wheat traveling from the port of Aktu to Baku, then by rail through Azerbaijan and Georgia to Armenia, is also expected to reach Armenia soon. In turn, Yerevan lifted all transit restrictions for cargo bound for Azerbaijan.
This week, the European Union handed Armenia the long-awaited Visa Liberalization Action Plan, officially launching the process. The document lays out a detailed roadmap for aligning Armenia with EU standards in governance, border and migration management, security and human rights. It's structured around four main blocks, each with two phases: first establishing laws and policies, then ensuring their full and transparent implementation. So the first will focus on document security, strengthening civil registration systems, and issuing biometric, machine-readable passports that meet international standards. This is something we've been talking about. The second block covers border management and migration. That means adopting a EU-style strategy for coordinated border control, fair asylum procedures, and protection for vulnerable groups. The third targets public order and security. This tackles organized crime, corruption, trafficking, and money laundering through stronger institutions, including the creation of an asset recovery office, protecting whistleblowers, ratifying key UN and Council of Europe conventions. And finally, the fourth block will focus on external relations and fundamental rights, ensuring fair treatment and freedom of movement for all residents. This includes citizens, foreigners, stateless persons, etc. And there's no clear timeline for when visa-free travel to the EU will become a reality for Armenian citizens. Interior Minister President Serzh Sargsyan noted the ball is now in Armenia's court. Progress will depend on how quickly the country implements the required reforms. And we know this is a years-long process. It's not going to happen in a matter of months.
Well, the shortest we've known this to happen is 3 years in other countries' cases. So let's see how long it takes for Armenia. And a recent report by the French Defense Ministry delivered to Parliament revealed that in 2023 and 24, the total amount of defense equipment procured by Armenia stood at a total of 278.5 million euros, including 74 million in 2023 and 204 million in 2024. According to the report, however, less than 10% or 20.8 million euros worth of French arms equipment have actually been delivered so far. This includes 15 unspecified portable anti-tank missile and rocket launchers. Franco-Armenian military cooperation has expanded in recent years, with Paris committing to help Yerevan strengthen its defense. The report notes that besides the numerous contracts for ground equipment, other prospects as well as projects to contribute to the development of Armenia's defense, industrial and technological base are still under discussion.
And this next news item that we're going to talk, it seems like we have to debunk, news that's circulating in the Armenian media space. Armenia's defense minister Suren Babikyan denied the supposed acquisition of Su-30 fighter jets from India. This was first reported in late October by a website called Indian Defense. With no immediate comment from Armenian officials, Babikyan told reporters that Yerevan and New Delhi have no such agreement. Speculation that Armenia may acquire Russian-developed Su-30 fighter jets, which India also produces domestically, intensified after Baku purchased 40 fighter jets from Pakistan earlier this year.
But before we move on, for the last 2 weeks, everywhere I look, it's just like breaking news. Armenia purchases $2 billion worth of fighter jets. According to Indian media.
Right.
They don't say according to
Indian media. But we've fallen
media.
into this, not us, not EVN Report, but others, every time that the Indian blogger or Indian news says something, they pick it up and they don't even bother to check.
Because previously, then it was confirmed by the army.
Yeah,
eventually,
but not always.
Previously, eventually.
But
yes.
I mean, just the logic, $2 billion, our entire budget for this year's 1.4 billion. So where's this 2 billion coming from? But anyway,
a lot of people got a lot of followers and likes.
Indeed. Meanwhile, Republic, an Indian outlet affiliated with the ruling party, reported that India and Armenia are preparing to sign defense agreements worth 3.5 to 4 billion, focused on modernizing Armenia's military capabilities. The deals reportedly under discussion include India's BrahMos supersonic cruise missile. I don't even know what that means, but this is what's written, with potential co-production in Armenia. Again, no immediate reaction by Armenian officials. And while this report may be more credible than the Su-30 rumors, it should be taken with caution as long as there is no corroboration from other sources. So I don't even know why we're saying it, but
we're saying because that might hit the news cycle very soon. So as a warning, it's not,
Yeah. Well, meanwhile, on November 6th, an Indian Defense Ministry delegation led by the Secretary of Defense Industries Promotion visited Yerevan. In a meeting with Armenia's Deputy Defense Minister Garen Brutyan, he discussed strengthening defense industrial cooperation, including by setting up joint ventures. He held a separate meeting with other senior officials, namely Deputy Minister of High-Tech Production, Gevorg Mantasyan, and Chair of the Military Industry Committee. Also this week it emerged that Azerbaijan has quietly acquired advanced Chinese air defense systems during the rehearsal for their military parade in Baku on November 8 to celebrate their victory in the 2020 war. Azerbaijan showcased the long-range HQ-9 surface-to-air missile. Its procurement has never been announced and signifies the first major acquisition of Chinese armament by Baku.
Well, it wasn't that quiet if it was in a parade. Well, and I wonder those who spread the news about Armenia acquiring will also retracted the news or said it was, debunked by the Armenian government. But still. In other news, the brother and nephew of Catholicos Karakin II were detained this week, accused of obstructing the campaign of Harutun Mkirtchian, the Republic Party's candidate for mayor in Varashabat. Mkirtchian said that while his team was campaigning in a nearby village, they were met with insults and told to leave when they passed by the Catholicos' brother's home. The Nersesyan family lawyer denied the accusations and released security footage he says proves their innocence. The video shows a brief exchange between Mkirtchian's campaigner and the Catholicos' relatives. Mkirtchian, however, questioned why the footage had no sound, saying that while there was no physical violence, there were verbal threats and intimidation. He also claimed that Nersesyan's supporters later tried to stop residents from attending his campaign.
And speaking of the church, on Sunday, this past Sunday, Prime Minister Pashinyan again attended a church service at Hovanavank Monastery led by defrocked priest Aram Asadirian. Later in the week, he declared that the Armenian Apostolic Church currently has no Catholicos, as Karakin II, this is according to Pashinyan, has violated his vow of celibacy and is holding the position illegally. Pashinyan also repeated an earlier claim that Karakin II's brother, Archbishop Esras Nersesyan, head of the Armenian Church's diocese in Russia and New Nakhichevan, had been recruited as a KGB agent during Soviet times.
But also he was recently given a medal by Putin for his services too.
And this week the Catholicos defrocked another priest, Father Daron Hunanyan from the Davush diocese. According to the Mother's See, he had abandoned his parish since May 2024, ignored repeated instructions from church authorities, and took part in an unauthorized ceremony organized by the defrocked priest we just mentioned, Aram Asadirian.
And Tbilisi has sharply criticized a resolution adopted during the 12th Euronest Parliamentary Assembly session held in Yerevan last week, which condemned the actions of Georgia's government. The document described Georgia's 2024 parliamentary elections as fraudulent, accused the ruling Georgian Dream Party of being self-appointed, and denounced the violent dispersal of peaceful protesters and the detention of demonstrators, journalists, and opposition figures. It also called for the release of political prisoners and warned that Georgian Dream would bear responsibility if visa-free travel to the Schengen area is suspended. Ruling civil contract MP Maria Karapetyan, who heads Armenia's delegation to Euronest, said that neither government nor opposition members supported the amendments related to Georgia, noting that most either abstained or did not participate in the vote. The only exception, she explained, was a technical amendment replacing the term South Ossetia with Tskhin Valley region. Karapetyan added that Armenia's delegation ultimately voted for the full resolution because it included provisions crucial for Armenia, support for the August 8 Washington agreements and the TRIP project, reaffirmation of unblocking regional communications based on sovereignty and territorial integrity, continued border delimitation, the withdrawal of Azerbaijani troops from Armenia's sovereign territory, and addressing the issue of Armenian detainees held in Azerbaijan. Georgia's ruling Georgian Dream Party had boycotted the Yerevan session, refusing to send a parliamentary delegation.
And news that just came in today, former Minister of Economy Vahan Keropyan has been arrested. New details are still coming out about the case. At this stage, it is clear that Keropyan is accused of participating in a criminal organization and of large-scale money laundering. According to the investigative committee, the case centers on a corruption scheme that took place between 2008 and 2014. Investigators say the owner of a wine and brandy factory, along with a former cadastre committee official and several business partners, created and led a criminal organization that used falsified documents to illegally remove land from Yerevan's municipal property fund. The land was then registered under affiliated names and used as collateral to secure loans exceeding $10 million from commercial banks. The committee says it has identified those involved, conducted more than a dozen searches, and uncovered evidence relevant to the case. Detention orders have been issued for 12 people, 7 of whom, including Keropyan, have been arrested. Keropyan headed a company called Star Divide during 2008 and 2014, the period covered by the investigation. And just as a reminder, after he was appointed Minister of Economy, he was dismissed from that post in February of 2024 and charged with abuse of official authority. He spent 4 months under house arrest before being released. And this case,
a separate
prior
case.
It was charges from a corruption case involving the company Synergy. Investigators claim that in a 2023 government tender, the Ministry of Economy under Keropyan's leadership selected Synergy over another company called Harmony, which had offered a lower price. Harmony later challenged the decision and won, and that's what triggered everything, and the trial in that case is still ongoing.
And speaking of ongoing trials and charges, former President Serzh Sargsyan is facing new corruption charges and has been banned from leaving the country. The case dates back to 2019 when Sargsyan was accused of embezzling nearly 490 million drams. This is about $1.2 million from a state fund intended to subsidize diesel fuel for farmers. He and several former officials were acquitted in May of 2024, but the Anti-Corruption Court of Appeal overturned the ruling, sending the case back for a new trial. According to Republican Party Deputy Head Armen Ashotyan, the new charges are based on the testimony of the late businessman Mikhail Baghdasarov, who he says withdrew his statements years ago, claiming they had been mistranslated. His native language was Russian. Ashotyan argues that the authorities are now reviving those retracted testimonies to justify the travel ban imposed on Sargsyan after he moved to initiate a no-confidence process against Prime Minister Pashinyan. Sargsyan's lawyers pointed out that in an earlier related case where Bagdasarov's statements were excluded, the court did not impose a travel ban. The former president currently faces 4 separate charges of corruption and abuse of power.
And recently declassified government documents have drawn criticism toward the Prime Minister's office for allocating state funds without a competitive tender to the Ashot Hovhannisyan Institute of Humanities. The decisions covering 2021 to 2025 show the institute received about $500,000. Officials said the documents were declassified after the Washington agreements, explaining that the new geopolitical realities made the issues studies that were commissioned that this institute was to have prepared. However, the records don't clarify why the grants were issued confidentially or what their exact purpose was. The institute says it began collaborating with the Armenian government in September of 2020, launching the Culture and Modernization Research Program to study how traditional social patterns interact and sometimes clash with the country's modernization process. The institute explained that its work, detailed on the program's website, combines historical and multidisciplinary analysis to explore deeper contradictions shaping Armenian society. And while the institute says it's unaware of the reasons behind the program's classification and later declassification, it noted that its research has been valued within the broader post-revolution reform agenda. addressing Armenia's complex and often sensitive social realities.
A horrific case in Armenia's Gyalarkunik region has once again raised questions about child protection and the effectiveness of the country's social services. A 3-year-old who had been missing since October 27 was found dead on November 2 in a field near the village of Zapata. Authorities say he was strangled by his father. According to reports, the child's 5-year-old brother, who has a speech and hearing disability, witnessed the murder. Media sources suggest that the father believed the boy was not his biological son. The family's 4 other children have been placed in a care center in Yerevan. The tragedy comes just days after the National Assembly passed major amendments to Armenia's family code and the law on the rights of the child and the child protection system, laws first adopted in 1996 that experts say had serious gaps. The new package strengthens the role of community social workers, introduces new monitoring and rapid response systems, defines clearer responsibilities for regional authorities, and establishes mechanisms to prevent and address bullying. It also ensures that children's opinions are taken into account in care decisions, removing previous age limits. We've written extensively about this, Maria. We did white papers about children's rights back in the day. They're a little outdated, but they still do highlight the major problems we have.
I think, the problem that we have is that we're not sure, and this is something we're looking into, how operative or how quickly social workers can respond when there's a family in crisis. And sometimes, coming back to the institute, right? Like our traditions and things, it's a family matter, let's not get involved. But when a child's life is at risk, what is the state's responsibility, and how proactive can they be in removing a child from a potentially dangerous and tragic and horrific, as you said, situation as this? And as far as we know, this family lived with the aunt's family, and there was 8 or 9 children living under one roof, and we suspect there's a lot of poverty and potentially abuse, and now this. So it's awful, really. And moving on, as always, we talk about the articles that we published this past week. Our columnist, Sheila Palin, wrote a piece called Respect the Pause, and she kind of looks at her own struggle with impatience and the hard-earned art of restraint, and I think we all suffer from that at some level. She writes with humor and honesty about how learning to pause before reacting, speaking, or judging can become an act of power.
And very poetic piece / photo story by Varina Ghazarian and his wife, who didn't want to be... He was mentioned right at the end because the text was hers, and the text was also very instrumental to the story. It's called the La Centoria of Yerevan. It looks...
Which is a flower, by the way.
Yes, we had to look it up. It's a blue flower. And we also found out that there aren't that many blue flowers in Yerevan.
Apparently, yeah.
It's the story of their family who used to go to the Dalma Gardens, not the mall, the area. And I suspect the Vahan Keropian's case might be because the Dalma Gardens historically also included the area of the brandy factory. I don't know, but anyway, it's about this plots of nature that they could still find in their neighborhood and how it gave them sanctuary, but now they're all gone.
Yeah, it's awful. I mean, anyway, I don't even want to talk about it. Another piece by our staff writer, Hranush Dermoyan, called When Tradition Isn't Enough, New Approaches to Parenting in Armenia, and I think every parent can kind of relate to this. It's, how our parents or grandparents were always ready to give advice, and many, turning from tradition now, young parents, to science-based parenting. She herself consulted a sleep expert to help with her child's sleeping issues. And apparently Armenia has something called a parenting school. So some families are redefining child rearing with modern tools, research, and empathy, and she talks from her own personal experience as well.
And speaking of sleep, we have a new piece in our creative text section. It's called When Technology Meets Health. And it's about how Armenian startups are tackling health issues. And interesting, the list of startups that the author has mentioned. One is working on sleep patterns, another one mental resilience, And another one on accessibility between how to communicate with doctors outside of Armenia for diagnosis when it's not possible in Armenia.
Yeah, it was very interesting. We have a lot of interesting things happening. And speaking of health, I guess this is related. It's called Waiting for a Right That Never Comes. It's by Lori Yumshajekyan. And it's about people in Armenia that have mobility disabilities and how they face, barriers. And it's not only about services that exist or don't exist. When they do exist, it's about how do you get there, right? So
it's about accessing the available services.
Like if you need to get a taxi, oftentimes taxis don't want to put a wheelchair. They don't have the room for a wheelchair. And as attitudes have been changing in Armenia, but the lack of accessible transport continues to keep people on the margins. And it's a lovely story from a village near Goris and also in Gyumri.
We're talking wheelchairs, but we also know that even for baby seats in the...
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, totally.
Well, back to health.
I know, it seems to be a theme we had.
This week, I did a podcast about, it's called Preparing Armenia's Health Professionals for Leadership. It's about a joint initiative of Boston University and the Henner Foundation. It's about this master's program for health professionals to go to Boston to learn and come back and establish and teach other programs for other health professionals.
And that's the kind of week we had here in Armenia. Thank you for listening. Have a safe and peaceful weekend, and we'll be back again next week.